Geek Speakers, welcome to another episode of Respect Your Shelf. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made my Thanos throne that appears to be hovering. It's not the exact one that you find in the movie. It was one that I found in the comic books that I liked. So first, what I did was I just literally used the figure to gauge how big the throne would have to be. Thanos is a little bigger than your average action figure of this scale, so I just laid it on there to see how big the back would need to be, and then started measuring so that I could make it all even and start cutting up my foam to make the backrest of the throne. So I really do suggest getting a metal ruler when you start building your dioramas rather than a plastic one. When you're using your X-Acto knife or your box cutter or whatever to cut the foam to score it, you are going to end up cutting into your ruler if you use a plastic or a wood one or whatever, which I do have some of those as well. And I've kind of ruined a lot of them. They're great when you're just using the pencil, but the metal ones are really what you want to be using for cutting the foam whenever you're using a razor blade. So also you'll see that I'm kind of making duplicate parts. I haven't actually made a second one, but I did make duplicate base pieces so that I could make more than one throne if I wanted to after. I have all the pieces sitting somewhere, or hopefully I don't even know if I still have them anymore. So I'm pretending that he's, sitting on the table, and I'm trying to gauge where the armrest would be put. Because the worst thing you can do is put in all this effort to make these props and creations, and then your figure won't even sit in it right, and they don't fit. And I try to measure about 4 times before I start cutting, because how many times have you thought you had the right measurement, and then you cut it all out, and you can't go backwards. Now I'm just making the seat for the throne. And this one that which you'll see a little later, this throne actually has some lighting on the bottom of it so that coming out of the seat of the throne, which I thought was a super cool idea. I still think it's a super cool idea. It turned out okay. You don't see the lights real well. They didn't show up as well as I was hoping they would. They're not bright. I used one of those like mini Christmas lights, like with just on the battery, that you can get for a couple bucks around Christmas time. I don't know if you can get them outside of the season. I'm sure you can get them on Amazon outside of the season. And be sure to check when I'm done making the video, I always go through and make a supply list that'll be in the description with links, usually on Amazon, for all of the supplies that I've used or something very similar that I've used. Because it can be hard. I know when I first started building, just to know what supplies to buy and where to get started. Now I have such a collection that I can usually make most of my stuff with whatever's on hand. But be sure to check that out. So I did sketch out beforehand what I wanted the throne to look like, but it wasn't to scale or anything, so there was no measurements. But I had the idea of how I wanted it to basically look. And now I'm just seeing, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to attach the armrests and stuff yet, so I'm just getting all the pieces measured correctly so that I can it's kind of like engineering as you go. And then off to the left there was a little bag of, which you can see, there's a bag with all those colorful things. Those are actually plastic drink stirrers. I looked around I wanted some acrylic posts that I could mount the throne on and then put into a base so that it would look like the throne was hovering. they were expensive and they weren't the right thickness. And then I came across, I don't even, it was kind of by accident, I came across these drink stirrers and decided just to use these instead. And they worked out absolutely fantastic, and they were a lot cheaper. And then I actually cut, on top of the drink stirrers, there's these mini cocktails that are a little out of scale for the 6-inch figures. They would work really well for 12-inch figures, but Pete may be able to use them for props in some photos, so I'm keeping all of them, so it served as a little bit of a 2-for-1, which is always awesome. Gotta use your imagination sometimes. Sometimes you can't find the exact building tools. Repurposing stuff is always awesome. So I used drink stirrers for the acrylic, you'll see in a little bit. And I try to always have a reference that I'm working from. Normally I forgot to post the picture, I put the reference photo, but I just Googled Thanos throne and looked at all the photos and looked at some stuff other people made, looked at some comic book stuff. This was before the movie came out, so I wasn't quite sure what throne they were going to have in the movie yet, which, by the way, I just saw it yesterday. I'm not going to say a word in case you haven't seen it when you watch this, but oh my god. Go see it. And then I always just pick whichever one I like the most. Like, even I did the Black Panther throne, and that was also not the throne that was in the movie, but it was one that I found online that I connected with much more. And whenever I enjoy what I'm making, you're obviously gonna, it just turns out better because your heart is in it. And that's obviously why we do this. So this throne is going to end up looking like it was carved and chipped out of stone. Just gotta measure where all the where the armrests are gonna go, and I'm gonna shape it in a minute now, so you'll get a much better idea of what the shape is gonna end up being like. And you'll see I have a little triangle ruler that I'm using. I got a set of 2 different size triangles and a, is it a compass? You know, the half circle ruler? They came in a set. Those come in handy a lot. I would absolutely suggest those. The circle one has all the angle measurements on it. So right there is my reference photo. Not that you could really see it, but I'm just checking it out every now and then to make sure I like the shape that I'm making. And here you can see I'm just eyeballing it, and I didn't measure out or anything. After a while, a lot of times you can pretty much see if things are even and whatnot. So I'm cutting that out for one reason, on the sides, to make room for where the armrest is going to be. And I kind of go back and forth on whether I use my hot wire tools or just a box cutter or an X-Acto knife. Sometimes it's just not worth getting all your tools out to make a little cut. But I also like the texture you get sometimes from using the knives. One of my favorite things about all the diorama building is the different textures that you can get with the styrofoam. Like, it starts off smooth and flat, and to make it look like stone or rock or whatever you're going for, you know, whatever your project is, the brick or metal, or I love the different textures that you can get. Like, every project I do now, I really do enjoy making stuff to make it look like faux rock or mountain or block, stuff like that. Any kind of stone, whether it's cut stone or rough stone. I think those are the most fun projects for myself, just because I love the textures. So here I'm cutting out an extra thick piece of styrofoam. I don't work with the white styrofoam a lot, just because I don't often like the bead texture that you end up with, but for this project I needed the depth and the thickness of the foam. So this is going to go underneath the seat, and in between those two layers is going to be where I store all the lights, which you'll see in a little bit. So this is my Hot Wire Foam Factory hand tool that I love. I got a set of 3 tools from Hot Wire Foam Factory, and this is one of my favorite ones. And I'm just kind of wobbling my hand, you know, back and forth on an angle, trying to create that jiggity jaggedy look of rock. I kind of wanted it to look like, you know, stalactites, kind of like how a cave would look natural and like it was carved, but some of it wasn't, and that kind of a look. And then in the back, what you're seeing, I was using a hot wire foam table. That one is not from the foam factory. That one, I'm trying to remember the brand name. I think it's Proxxon, maybe Proxxon, I believe, is the brand name of that. That is one of my most favorite tools as well. I don't, if you've looked at any of my other work, to be able to get the thin pieces of foam cut, so cutting out shapes and stuff is great. Normally you can do a lot of that with your knives and whatever, but to be able to take one of those pieces and do a thin sheet, like, oh my god, it changed my world with the diorama building. And I'm still learning how to use these tools and what other things you can create with them. Sometimes you just kind of let your imagination go and be like, how can I look at this, and with all these tools now, how can I accomplish that? I just keep whittling away at it until I like how the shape looks. Imagining that this is going to be the piece that is the bottom of his throne that is floating above the ground. These tools make it so easy. It cuts like butter. And I'm just using a little rocking motion back and forth as I'm moving to get the jiggity jaggedy feel. So now I'm just making sure that it fits right and how it will look. I like to double check a lot as I'm building when I have multiple pieces, just that everything fits together the way I think it's going to in my head. And you just keep going until you like how it looks. It's not an exact science. And then before I glued them together, and before all the electrical is in there, I wanted to make sure when the two pieces were glued together that they looked like they were meant to be together. And so I wanted to put a little beveled, jagged edge on it, and then the two pieces matched together kind of like a puzzle. And I didn't want to do it after I put the electrical in there, just because, knowing me, I would get the wire in there and just more headaches. So now what I'm doing is when you buy the three tool piece kit from Foam Factory, you get one power cord and then the 3 pieces. So I was just switching out the wire one for, see the thing smoking. This is like just a single long thick wire that I really love to use for making holes, and when you're going all the way through the foam. So if you need to make any sort of hole, this I'm just literally sticking it through to make a hole just for the light, which is, you know, and it melts the white foam super, 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 super well. So you got to be a little more careful. The pink, it takes a little more to melt that foam, the pink or the green foam. But it makes it so easy. Like, I probably wouldn't even attempted to put in the lights this way if I would have had to use, if I wouldn't have these tools. They smoke a little bit when there's residue from the foam left on there. I'm not always great about cleaning them off after. So then when I turn them on the next time, they smoke up a little bit, but and I'm not being real scientific about this either. I'm just kind of winging it. It's fun. So here's my string of Christmas lights that I was mentioning before. They're battery operated. I think they take like 3 AAA batteries or something to work, which is great that you can buy some that I think they take like watch batteries or something, but some of them you can't change the batteries once they die. These you can, which is good for what we use them for, and he can use them in the photography and stuff like that. This one also sits on the shelf when it's not being used for his photography or whatever, which is my goal someday, to have sets for all of his figures to sit in on the shelves when he's not photographing them, and then also have, you know, sets that he uses to photograph with. We'll see if that ever if that ever happens. That may be a lot of years from now. So I hollowed out a space in there for all the extra wire to sit and the wire between the lights to sit. Just made a little pocket. And I'm just seeing how it'll all fit together. I haven't made one before, so I'm kind of in my head, I'm thinking if it's really going to work or not. You never know how these things are going to turn out, but you got to try. So I think that looks pretty, is going to look pretty cool. So now what I'm doing is the holes that I made after I put the lights through them, I'm not going to be able to paint them because the light bulbs will be in there. So I actually had the foresight to paint the holes black before I assembled the whole thing, which I'm not always that great at thinking ahead in that way. So try to plan a little bit. I had run out of actual black paint, so I'm using black gesso. Black gesso is one of my favorite things with the foam. It's a great primer. A lot of people use black washes, which is what I used to do in the beginning, and I'm originally, as an artist, I'm a painter, so it occurred to me, like, what could we use as a primer, because you can't use the, you know, any spray paint primers. And then I'm like, well, on canvas you use the gesso, so why not give that a shot? And I really do. It doesn't give you a solid, you'd still need a couple coats of gesso to get a solid coat, but I like how it seals it and gives you a great base to work with, especially when you're doing any sort of textures. When I do the gesso, I really make sure I get in the crevices, so that when you're putting the color over it, those deep lines are black instead of the pink or the white from the foam. So now what I'm making is, using the same techniques I used for underneath the seat, is I'm making the footrest. And the footrest I'm going to just mount on the base. See, and I start with that tool, and then I forgot that, oh, why isn't it looking the same? Because you'd used the other tool, so I'm switching them out now after I remembered. And actually, if you see those little circles on the bottom, what I had done, they don't stay hot very long for safety purposes, but what I've done anyways, I put magnets on the handle, and then I put a magnet on my desk, and when I'm not using them, I stick them to the magnet. Although I need to get stronger magnets. These ones weren't great, but I thought it was a good idea. I also have one for my hot glue gun. My desk gets a little chaotic and messy, and I was really worried that I was going to end up melting foam that I didn't want to be melting. So I made a little spot, and then they just Velcro right to it, or magnet right to it. So for the footrest, I didn't go quite so pointy and skinny on the bottom, because this is actually getting mounted directly on the base. It's not floating with the acrylic. I can't wait to do more projects with these tools though, just to see the kind of textures you can get to, you know, making rock and stone and stuff. It's fun. So here's my base, and I'm just trying to line it up and seeing where I'm going to situate everything. It's hard when you're working with something that's going to be floating to really line up where it's going to end up going. So I just wanted to give it a little more stability than just hot gluing it to the flat surface. So I put a peg in it. I don't know if it was really necessary, but it's not going to hurt in the long run. Yeah, I realized I should have pre-made the hole in the base before I did it, so then I went and poked thing in there. So connecting the footrest. It takes a couple seconds for the hot glue to actually dry. So here are my skewer sticks, my stir sticks that I'm going to use. And I just used a wire cutter to cut it. I don't really know what you're supposed to use to cut acrylic, but I figure one of the tools I have would work, so the wire cutters seem to work really well. So here are the little Christmas lights. I had actually put them in the holes once as like a trial run, and now I'm just to make sure it all lined up right before I glued it all together. Then I took them out and I actually painted all the lights blue, for hoping that they would look like blue lights. I just used some regular blue acrylic paint. That did not work out as much as I was hoping either, but we tried. On a couple of the light bulbs you can see that they look like a purpley blue. So I just poked the light into the hole far enough so that you can see it, but not that it comes out. And these strings are made of wire, so it actually is much easier to work with than if it was like metal wire, not plastic coated. I'm always trying to find ways to put lights into the projects, and it's hard because I'm not good at any of the soldering or how to like build lights. I've never learned how to do it. Someday I'm going to force myself to learn how to do it, but as of yet I haven't. So when I can come up with ideas to use these ready-made lights, like these are the Christmas lights, and I've used finger lights, and I've used the book lights for in alleys and stuff like that. I think it just gives it another dimension, makes it a little more realistic. So I'm just winding the extra up and putting it in the middle because I don't want it hanging out in the back, distracting when the throne is just sitting there. And then I just hot glued that puppy together. Waiting for the hot glue gun to... Oh yeah, I didn't have enough glue in it. And then we just sandwiched it together. You'll always get a little bit of the fuzzies from the glue. So here I'd already installed the skewers on the back. So I do want to mention I did use my Hot Foam Factory, the straight wire tool, and I literally just laid it flat on the back of the throne, and it melted a little groove in it so that I could lay my skewers in the groove, and then I hot glued them on there. And that's how it's going to be mounted to the base so that it floats. So what I do here, oh, and here are my big wire cutters. Those are meant for actually metal cutting, like sheet metal cutting. They work really well for this though. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that this is gonna look right. And you're gonna see that I make holes in it for the skewers. And I, you know, think this is gonna be great. I put them in there and then it's not. I ended up putting the throne way too close to the footrest, and when Thanos is sitting on it, his boots hang over the edge. So I didn't like how the tips of his boots were hanging off the front of it. So I decided to make new holes so that his boots would sit flat. But I didn't think it was that big of a deal because I'm going to be texturing the whole base that it's going on, and I figured I could just cover those holes up. I'd rather the overall look be what I want in the end than do all this work and then... Yeah, and always make sure you know where that your wires are, because I almost end up gluing it in there and the wire would have been caught between it. It would have looked funky. So that's much better, I think. His boots sit where they should. And then I turn the lights on just to see. I mean, you can kind of see him. You can see him when it's not light out, but I actually accidentally had it on the flashier setting. So what I end up doing, I'm going to start putting the texture on the base, and see all those little schnibbles that I had cut off when I was making the underneath of the throne. I'm going to use a bunch of those when I'm making the texture on the base. So in my mind, it was meant to look like the throne is floating, you know, on a rocky planet. That's the look I was going for on the base. And I'm just beveling all the edges so that it looks like it's carved and chipped, the stone on the throne. I like to try to get rid of any sort of the sharp edges on these things. Sometimes just the simple techniques can change the whole look. Then even though nobody's really going to see the back, I always try to, just in case it's on an angle. And these knife box cutters that I'm using, you can get, I'll have a link in the supply list, but you can also get them at the dollar store for like a 3-pack. Make sure you be careful. I cut myself often, to be honest. Getting rid of as many of those edges as I can. And then what I have come up with, whenever I have tiles or stone or anything like that, that I'm not doing a lot of cracks or deep texture, I like to take the end of my X-Acto knife and burnish the whole area, and it just makes it look much more realistic to me when you're dealing with like stone. Even if you have unless it's like laser cut, stone isn't going to be completely flat. There's always a little bit of texture to it. So I still have to put the texture on the base and then add the armrests. So, and I think this video is about 40 minutes. Here's just so you can see that stage with the lights on. I think the video is about 40 minutes. I have it double timed, the video, and I did edit some stuff out if it was too monotonous. So it's still, the project is and then the painting I didn't video because it's a pretty basic paint job. I thought this one was more about the construction, but it was probably took me a couple hours to build it. All of this takes much longer than you think it's going to. This wasn't even that complicated, but everything is very time consuming and you have to wait for stuff to dry. So here's what I did. I took a bunch of the schnibbles from creating the, you know, the base of the throne and everything, and I glued them on all different angles. I made a couple rocks in the back the same way I made the throne and stuff to give some sort of a backdrop, and then I took the schnibbles and glued them on. I thought it gave a great like planet texture. Then what I did, this is actually toilet paper. So I'm just taking pieces of toilet paper and then Elmer's glue and putting Elmer's glue in a little water, and I'm putting a layer over the stone. The reason I'm doing this is it eliminates that a lot of those break lines you get from the object that you glued to the base and the base, which when you're dealing with something, you know, the surface of a planet, it's not going to look like these aren't all individual pieces just sitting on top. And I've learned from a couple other previous projects I did where I made the cave front. You could see all the break in the lines when I layered the styrofoam to get the thickness I needed. And if I would have done something like this, I would have been able to get rid of those lines. So that's what I was trying to create here. And then the tissue also covers in some gaps, and it just gives a real good overall consistency to the surface. And if it can be a little messy, but just use thin toilet paper or tissue paper. So there I put the glue all over the base first, and then I put the tissue over it, and then just lightly dab it down in. And that seems to work really well. And then also it gives little wrinkles and stuff on the flat surface, which it wouldn't be completely flat. So it reproduces ground, I think, really, really well. And as you can see in the background, because I haven't done it yet, that little rock I made is like 3 layers of styrofoam glued together. And when you put the tissue over it, it'll hide those lines. Which I'm excited. I want to do some tree trunks, and I think doing this technique on that will also, you need to glue a couple of the sheets of the styrofoam together to get the thickness of the trunk you want, but then whenever you cut it, you can always see those lines. So if you put the tissue on like that, I think it's going to do a really good job of filling those in, and would also just be a great texture for trunk, for bark. It'll give you the wrinkles and stuff. So it doesn't always do what you want it to, but so then I make my way around the whole base doing this with the tissue. Then when I'm done with the tissue, I also take 2 different grits of sand and sprinkle that around. I used to add the sand to the gesso when I was doing my base coat. I mean, I sometimes still do that, but it occurred to me that, well, if I just paint it, like this has got glue and everything from the tissue already on there, so I just sprinkled it on there. I didn't feel that it was necessary to mix it in with the base coat, but I mean, you can do it either way. Here I'm putting it on the rock, as you can see, to hide those layer lines. It always uses much more glue than you think it's going to. And then, of course, before you can paint or anything, you have to let all of the glue dry completely, especially when you're using the sand and stuff, because you'll end up just taking it right off if you don't wait. I believe I let this dry overnight. Not that you would need to wait that long, but and then those previous holes that I had made, I just, you know, covered up with a little piece of the white styrofoam. There's always a way to cover up your mistakes. I don't really worry about it that much anymore. Makes you be more creative anyway. And remember to put a layer of glue down and then put the tissue over it, and then you can put also more glue over it. But the key is putting the glue on the surface you're sticking it to. If you don't, when you go to put the glue over it, you'll end up just ripping the tissue apart. As you can see, it's pretty time consuming, but therapeutic, enjoyable. And then here you'll see how I sprinkled well, this is the whole thing completely done. And now I'm going to sprinkle it with the different types of sand. And these are modeling sands for like, you know, people that do trains and stuff like that. The landscapes. So I just dump a bunch on there and then I just shake it into the trash can when I'm done. There was a couple places I wanted to add some glue that I hadn't before. And then I'm opening this one. This one's a coarser sand. They happen to be different colors, but the color doesn't matter to me because I'm going to be painting over it anyway. And I'm shaking it out over the trash can, and then here is the final texture before I paint it. Kind of looks like a mess right now, but I think it turns out pretty good in the end once it's painted. So then you got to let it dry completely. I put a layer of black gesso, and I used 3 different shades of gray paint. A dark, medium, and light, and then dusting a dry brush of the light over the top. The painting wasn't that complicated on this one, so I didn't go in depth with it, but here is the final product. And as you can see, there's not a lot of lines on the base. I think it really turned out well with the tissue. He fits really well in the seat. Looks very authoritative. And there you have it. There is our Thanos throne. And then I got a shot that Pete took in actual photography, not me just clicking some shots. And I just wanted to thank you guys for stopping in to watch our video. And please subscribe to our channel. Check out our accounts on Instagram and Facebook and Etsy. We recently just added some things, merchandise to our Etsy store. You can get a sweatshirt or a mug or a hat or a t-shirt with Geek Speak and Junk or Respect Your Shelf and some other cute little funny things that we're constantly adding to that. So here's a glimpse of some of that stuff. If you want to support our channel, that would be a great way to do it. Sometimes we're going to throw up some customized action figures or dioramas on Etsy too. Right now we don't have anything because we're getting ready for MegaCon next month. But here are our links to our Instagram and everything. There'll also be links down in the description, so it make it easy for you. So thanks for stopping in, and always remember to respect your shelf.